All right, we are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Skandha 6, Discourse 9. The title of the discourse is Indra slays Vishvarupa, and routed by the demon Vrutra, the Devas call on the sage Dadhichi at the instance of the Lord. So this is immediately following on what we read last time, which was on the victory of Indra and the Devas over the Asuras after the Devas were abandoned by their guru Brahaspati for having disrespected him, particularly for Indra having disrespected him. And they appointed a new guru in replacement. And with his help through the Narayana Kavacha, they reconquered the Asuras. But that is not the end of the story. So the new guru that they installed as their guru was Vishvarupa Deva, who is half Deva, half Asura himself. His father was a Deva and his mother was an Asura. His father was Tvashta Deva. Sri Shuka resumed, the said Vishvarupa had 3 heads, O descendant of Bharata, by one of which he drank the sap of the Soma plant, which is the common drink of the Devas, usually offered in ancient Vedic yajnas. By another, he drank spirituous liquor, meaning alcohol, wine, mostly the type of wine called sura. And by the third of which he ate food, so we have heard. Indeed, with reverence, he visibly and loudly proclaimed the oblations poured into the sacrificial fire as the share meant for the gods. Since the share meant for the Devas specifically, since the Devas were his fathers, his own father Tvashta Deva, being one of the Devas, O king. But he secretly offered a share of the yajna oblations to the Asuras, as he managed to convey the same offerings to them, even while pouring oblations into the sacred fire. For he had his sympathies with the Asuras because of the affection his mother, Rachanasura, bore to them. Coming to know of this behavior on the part of Vishvarupa, which amounted to an offense against the Devas and a religious fraud, and afraid of him, since of course the Devas are at war with the Asuras, to be offering equal power to them in Indra's eyes constitutes dangerous treason, and that his guru might betray him. Indra angrily cut off his heads with expedition, meaning at once, quickly cut off all 3 of his heads. The head by which he drank soma became the bird Kapinjala. That's the francolin bird, is the type of bird it's called in English. The head by which he drank wine became the kalavinka, the common sparrow. And the head by which he ate food became a partridge. Indra accepted with joined palms the sin of having assassinated a Brahmana, the Brahmahatya papam. And not just Brahmahatya, but he murdered his own guru. Even though he was powerful enough to ward it off. So Indra did not have to accept that sin, but he chose to. So he bore the weight of that act for a year, meaning a Deva's year, so 360 of our years. And Indra divided it at the end of a year into 4 parts and assigned them in equal proportions to the earth, water, trees, and to women, with a view to self-purification in the eyes of beings. The earth accepted a quarter along with the boon that a hollow dug into it would be filled by itself. A barren soil, which is prohibited as a site for sacred rites in the Vedas, is vividly seen on earth as an external sign of the sin of killing a Brahmana. The trees assimilated another quarter of the papam, along with the boon that their chopped off parts would grow again. The sin of killing a Brahmana is clearly perceived in them in the form of the gum of trees, which should not therefore be eaten. Women took a third quarter of the papam, with the boon of constant sexual urge or the capacity for sexual union even during pregnancy. This sin is clearly perceived in them in the form of the menstrual discharge from month to month. Water absorbed the fourth quarter of the impurity with the boon of an abundant supply of water from springs, etc., and from the cycle of rain. The papam is seen in the water in the form of bubbles and foam, and therefore water full of bubbles and foam or froth in a stream like stagnant water are regarded as impure and unfit for drinking. Anyone imbibing these imbibes the impurity. Then Tvashta, whose son Vishvarupa had been slain by Indra, poured oblations into the sacred fire by way of retaliation in order to procure a mortal enemy for Indra. So he's performing a yajna to summon up someone to avenge his murdered son and kill Indra. With the prayer, O Indra Shatru, O enemy of Indra, may you grow in power to an enormous degree and kill your mighty foe without delay. Now, from the Anvaharya Pachana, the Dakshinagni fire, the southern fire, rose a demon of terrible aspect, who looked like death appearing at the time of universal dissolution for the destruction of the worlds. He rapidly grew to the extent of an arrow's shot on every side from day to day, presented the appearance of a burnt hill by his colossal size and dark color, and possessed the glow of a mass of evening clouds. With a beard and mustaches and hair red as heated copper, and eyes as fierce as the midday sun, he danced as if holding the vault of heaven on the end of his brilliant trident, gave a loud roar and shook the earth with the stamp of his feet. Terribly afraid, all created beings ran to and fro as they saw him respiring again and again with his extensive gaping mouth, containing fearful teeth and deep as a cavern, that seemed to imbibe the firmament, lick the stars with his tongue, and devour the three worlds. That sinful and most ferocious demon was rightly named as Vritra. Vritra in Sanskrit literally means enveloper, inasmuch as these worlds were enveloped by that gigantic mass of darkness appearing in the form of Tvashta's offspring. Rushing against him with their troops, the generals of the Devas assailed him, each with his hosts of celestial missiles and weapons. But Vritra swallowed them all. With their splendor eclipsed, nay, amazed and dejected, they all thereupon composed themselves and approached Lord Narayana, the most ancient person, dwelling in their very heart. The Devas prayed, "May our safety follow from him of whom is afraid even the well-known death. Death to whom ether, air, fire, water, and earth, the three worlds, Brahma and others, and we all pay tribute, trembling. An ignoramus is he who resorts to anyone else than the aforesaid Lord, who is free from egotism, who is perfectly tranquil, who has all his desires fully satisfied by the realization of his own self, and who is uniform in that he desires to cross the ocean with the help of a dog's tail." That's an old saying, meaning that he is unconditioned in his preferences, that he doesn't have an aversion to anything. The same Lord, in the form of the divine fish, to whose colossal horn King Satyavrata fastened his boat, which was no other than the earth, and duly got through the peril, will surely protect even his dependents against the danger from Vritra, which is difficult to get rid of. At the dawn of creation, Brahma fell from the lotus on the water that had submerged everything during the period of universal dissolution, and which had assumed a frightful aspect due to the roaring of its billows raised by the fierce winds. May the same Lord be our savior, with whose help the same Brahma, who was all by himself, got over that peril. That Lord, though alone, evolved us by his own Maya. That Lord, though alone, evolved us by his own Maya, and with his help, we create the universe already created by him. Yet regarding ourselves as independent rulers, we are unable to behold his form, although he has been fully active even prior to us. Though ever existent, yet manifesting himself through forms among the gods, rishis, human beings, and lower animals by his own Maya, he protects us in every yuga, and even more than once in a yuga, treating us as his own when he finds us excessively tormented by enemies. We all resort for protection solely to that shining one, our object of adoration, and cause manifested in the form of the universe and yet transcending it, appearing as matter and spirit, and affording protection to all. That supreme spirit will bring happiness to us, his devotees. Sri Shuka continued, while the aforesaid devas were thus praying, O great king, the Lord appeared in their hearts, wielding his conch, discus, and mace. They beheld him being waited upon on all sides by 16 attendants, who were similar to him, but without the Srivatsa mark and the Kaustubha gem, and with eyes resembling a pair of full-blown autumnal lotuses. Overwhelmed with joy at his sight, they all fell prostrate on the ground, O king, and slowly rising, offered praises. The devas said, Hail to you, whose power stands revealed in the form of sacrificial performances. Hail to you, even as the time spirit. Hail to you, who have indeed hurled your chakra. Hail to you, who have acquired numberless blessed names. No one born after creation, O Lord, is fit to know your highest essence, which lies beyond the three courses, you being their controller. Obeisance to you denoted by Om, O Lord Narayana, O Vasudeva, the most ancient person, the supreme person, possessed of infinite glory, supremely auspicious, supremely blessed, supremely merciful, one without a second, the support of the universe, the undisputed ruler of all the worlds, the universal Lord, the spouse of Lakshmi. You are the same as the realization of the bliss inherent in the self and revealed of itself in the region of the self, when the gate leading to it in the shape of the mind is opened consequent on the door of ignorance being set aside through the practice of devotion to the Lord, which is awakened and realized by ascetics and recluses by means of supreme concentration of mind through meditation on the self. Devoid of support, bodiless and transcendent as you are, you create, preserve, and destroy this qualified universe by your own self, undergoing no transformation, and not expecting cooperation from us. The course of this pastime of yours is really something difficult to understand. Moreover, we do not actually know whether, entering bodies, you helplessly reap the good and evil consequences of your own actions, just as a Devadatta builds a house on his earth and experiences joy and sorrow there, or whether, reveling in yourself and given to self-control and with an unruffled consciousness, you remain a witness. The use of saying a Devadatta there just means a hypothetical person. There's, in the ancient Sanskrit philosophical texts, there's a convention that Devadatta is like the name that's often used to just mean a person, for example, just kind of like the most common name they could think of. Really speaking, the two alternatives are not incompatible in you, the Almighty and Absolute Lord, possessing countless varieties of excellences and unfathomable greatness, transcending all phenomena, and beyond the range of controversies of theorists holding perverse views due to their mind being bewildered by scriptures full of doubts, inquiries, hypotheses, specious arguments, and sophisms, not even touching the fringe of truth. In fact, what predicate is there which cannot be conveniently applied to you, who stand placing by your side your own Maya, while both alternatives are absent in your essence? Just as a piece of rope assumes the shape of a serpent and so on in the eye of those who are prepossessed by the idea of a snake and the like, so you appear in your true perspective to those endowed with a balanced judgment, and what you are not to those of a deluded understanding. Again, you are the only truth in all phenomena, the universal Lord, the cause of causes of the entire universe. Your presence is clearly indicated by the illuminating power of the intellect, senses, and so on, since you are the inner controller of all the jivas. You are the only entity left over when everything else has been negated. Under such circumstances, then, O Madhusudana, how can these saintly and supreme votaries of yours, who are exclusively devoted to you and look upon you alone as their beloved friend, who are adept in achieving their object, ever think of actually giving up the constant service of your lotus feet, on clinging to which further revolution in the whirlpool of transmigration ceases? For due to the never-ceasing joy flowing copiously into their mind from a drop of the sweet ocean of your nectar-like glory, tasted even once, they are made to forget the small bits of seeming delights of sense, whether enjoyed or heard of, their mind finding incessant and excessive delight in the Almighty Lord, the soul of the universe, and the beloved friend of all living beings. O soul and abode of the three worlds, O Lord who wield your power over the three worlds, and whose glory captivates the mind of the three worlds, O guide of the three worlds, even the Daityas and Danavas are your own glorious manifestations. Considering that this is not a time for their activities, you have, O wielder of the rod of punishment, meted out punishment according to their offense, manifesting yourself through your own Maya in the form of gods, human beings, beasts, half men and half beasts, and aquatic creatures. In the same way, O Lord, get rid of the yonder Vritra son of Tvashta too, if you deem fit. Be pleased, O sinless one, to cure the fever within our heart by your glances, accompanied with a gracious, artless and charming and refreshing smile. Artless meaning sincere, meaning without pretense or without dishonesty, as well as by drops of nectar in the form of sweet and polite words coaxing from your mouth, since we, who were already yours, have been accepted as your own by revealing your form to us, and are bent low before you, O divine Father, nay, grandfather, our heart being bound by the chain of love to your lotus feet through contemplation on them. Now, as a matter of fact, O Lord, there is no particular purpose to be made known by us to you here any more than sparks, etc., can bring illumination to fire, since you divert yourself with your divine Maya, that is instrumental, as it were, in evolving, maintaining, and destroying the whole universe, and dwell within the heart of all the multitudes of living beings, as Brahman and as their inner controller, and outside them, as Prakriti. As their material cause and revealer, it is you that directly know all the jivas with regard to the peculiarities of their place, time, body, and condition. You are the witness of the thought of all, taintless by nature as the sky, the unconditioned transcendent reality and the embodiment of sattva unmixed with rajas and tamas. Therefore, pray accomplish yourself, that object of ours, the hankering for which has prompted us to seek the shade of your lotus feet, the means of relieving the toil of transmigration caused by manifold sins, you being the Almighty Lord and Supreme Teacher. Hence, O Master, do away with the demon Vritra son of Tvashta, who is devouring the three worlds, and by whom, O enchanter of all, our glory, missiles, and weapons have been swallowed up. Hail to you, the stainless Sri Hari, the reliever of agonies, of delightful renown, having your abode in the cavity of the heart, and without beginning, the witness, the embodiment of bliss. The name here being translated as the embodiment of bliss was Krishna. The wealth of the righteous and the universally approved avenue leading the traveler on the path of metempsychosis to his home at the end. Sri Shuka went on. Thus extolled, O king, with reverence by the devas, Sri Hari was highly gratified to hear the prayer offered to him and addressed them. The Lord said, I am pleased, O jewels among the gods, with the sacred text by which you have offered prayer to me. He's praising their words by referring to it as a new sacred text, which they have just composed, and by which consciousness of the transcendent nature of the soul, as well as devotion to me, will be awakened in men. What is there which cannot be easily attained when I am pleased, O great gods? Yet he who knows the truth and is solely devoted to me does not seek anything else than myself. The fool who looks upon the material objects as real is not alive to his highest good. If anyone bestows those objects on the individual seeking them, such one is of the same description. In other words, not alive to the highest good. Indeed, he who is himself conscious of the highest good would never tell an ignorant person the path of action. Surely a good doctor would never give an unwholesome food to an ailing man longing for it. Indra, may all be well with you. Seek ye Dadhyan, the sage more popularly known as Dadhichi, the noblest of rishis, and beg of him without delay his body, which has grown strong through the repetition of mantras, such as the holy Narayana Kavacha, religious observances, and asceticism. Having actually realized Brahman, the absolute, free from tinge, he imparted that knowledge to the two Ashvini Kumaras. The Ashvini Kumaras are twin brothers, Devas who are twin brothers. They're the physicians of the Devas. The knowledge which is named Ashvashira, because it was imparted by the sage with the head of a horse, and which contributed to the immortality of the aforesaid Devas. So there's a footnote here explaining this story, and it is an interesting story to hear of Dadhichi imparting the Ashvashira teaching. So having come to know that the sage Dadhichi was well versed in Brahma Vidya, and the knowledge relating to the supreme Brahman, the two Ashvini Kumaras once approached him and sought from him the knowledge of Brahman. The sage, who was then engaged in some religious rite, politely dismissed them, assuring them that he would impart that knowledge to them on some other occasion. No sooner had they left than Indra called on the sage and asked him not to teach Brahma Vidya to the Ashvini Kumaras, who were physicians and as such hardly qualified to receive it. The actual reason is because Indra didn't want to lose their services by them moving on to higher things, and threatened to behead the sage in case he insisted on imparting the said knowledge to them. When the Ashvini Kumaras approached the sage again and learnt from him of Indra's threat, they offered to cut off the sage's head in advance and replace it with the head of a horse, since they could thereby fulfill Indra's curse and also resurrect the dead, which was an art they possessed, and requested him to teach Brahma Vidya by the horse's head, so that if Indra actually came and severed the sage's head in the course of the latter's discourse, they could then restore his original head. The sage, who prized his word more than his head, readily agreed and allowed himself to be beheaded by the heavenly physicians and taught them the Brahma Vidya with the horse's head, which was why the teaching that he gave was called Ashvashira, the horse's head teaching. Dadhichi, the son of the sage Atharva, who was one of the two rishis who cognized the Atharva Veda, which was named after him, taught to the Deva Tvashta the prayer Narayana Kavacha, full of my essence, Vishnu is saying, and incapable of being superseded, which Tvashta taught to Vishvarupa and which you have received from Vishvarupa. Solicited by you, the sage will part with, in your favor, and in favor of the two Ashvini Kumaras, his own limbs, and not just his limbs, but his whole body. He will voluntarily die and drop his body. Then out of the bones, those limbs, out of the bones of those limbs will be produced a thunderbolt, forged by Vishvakarma, by means of which, and strengthened with my power, O Indra, you will be able to sever the head of Rutra. When he is slain, you will regain your glory, missiles, weapons, and riches, and everything will be well with you, for enemies can never destroy those who are devoted to me. Thus ends the 9th discourse in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 10, an account of the conflict between Indra and Vrutra. Sri Shuka began again. Having thus fully instructed Indra, Lord Sri Hari, the protector of the universe, disappeared on that very spot, while the Devas, with their unblinking eyes, kept looking on. It is generally described as a feature of Devas that their eyes never blink because they are not dried by the air. Solicited by the Devas in the aforesaid manner, and rejoicing, the magnanimous sage Dadhichi, the son of Atharva, replied as follows, as though jesting, O scion of Bharata. So he said this kind of jokingly. O Devas, have you no idea of the pain that is actually caused to embodied beings at the time of death? a pain so hard to bear that it robs them of their consciousness? The body is the dearest object in this life, sought after by living beings that are eager to survive. Who would have the courage to part with it, even for Lord Vishnu, should he ask for it, since they have just asked for him to die and give them his corpse? The Devas replied, now what is that which is difficult to part with, O Brahmana? For magnanimous souls like you, who are compassionate to living beings and whose deeds are extolled by men of sacred renown. Surely selfish people do not realize the difficulty of the donor. If they know it, they would not ask a gift, and a donor would not say no when capable of granting their request. The sage said, I replied to you only because I wished to hear from you about dharma. And then he composes himself and says, here do I cast off this body, which is dear to you, and which is sure to leave me one day. The man who fails to earn by means of his transient body, O lords, neither religious merit nor fame through kindness to living beings, deserves to be pitied even by immobile creatures. The everlasting virtue practiced by men of sacred renown consists merely in this, that a man himself grieves and rejoices in sympathy with the grief and joy of his fellow beings. Oh, what a pity! Oh, how painful it is that a mortal should not serve others with his wealth, sons and other kinsmen and body, which besides being transitory, are not only of no use to him, but really belong to others. Sri Shuka continued, having thus made up his mind and merging his self in the Lord, the supreme reality, the sage Dadhichi, the son of Atharva, dropped his body. Having controlled his senses, vital airs, mind, and intellect, his eyes fixed on the truth and fetters broken, he established himself in the supreme yoga of perfect identity with Brahman, so that he did not know when the body actually fell. Now, taking up the thunderbolt forged by Vishvakarma, the heavenly artisan, out of the bones of the sage Dadhichi, and endowed with the Lord's energy, Indra felt very strong. Surrounded by all the hosts of devas, he was being extolled by crowds of sages and shown on the back of Airavata, his divine elephant, as though delighting the three worlds. In order to cut down Vritra, who was surrounded by generals of demon cohorts, he assailed the demon with impetuosity and full of wrath, O Parikshit, even as Rudra, the god of destruction, rushes against death. Thereupon ensued a most fierce conflict of the devas with the demons on the bank of the Narmada River at the beginning of Treta, during the very first round of the 4 yugas of the current Vaivasvata Manvantara. The demons headed by Vritra, O king, could not bear to see Shakra. Shakra is another name for Indra, the king of the devas, armed with the thunderbolt and resplendent in his native glory on the field of battle, and accompanied by the Rudras, the 11 Rudras, the Vasus, the Adityas, the 2 Ashwini Kumaras, the Pitris, the gods of fire, the minor Agni Devas, the Maruts, the Ribhus, the Sadhyas, and the Vishvedevas, Namochi, Shambara, Anarva, Dvimurdha, the two-headed, Rishabha, Ambara, Hayagriva, Shankushira, Viprachitti, Ayomukha, Puloma, Vrashaparva, Praheti, Heti, and Utkala, and other Daityas and Danavas, Yakshas and Rakshasas, led by Sumali and Mali, who numbered several thousand and were adorned with gold ornaments, resisted and harassed the vanguard of Indra's army, which was difficult to approach even for death, since all these Asuras and Yakshas and Rakshasas who opposed the Devas have taken advantage of Vritra to join with Vritra and try to kill Indra. With a lion's roar, the furious demons, who were not the least agitated, meaning not the least afraid at this point, they think they're going to win, covered the generals of the celestial army on all sides with showers of maces, iron bludgeons, arrows, barbed darts, mudgaras, which are war hammers, lances, pikes, axes, swords, shatagnis. A shatagni is a cylindrical piece of wood, 4 cubits long and studded with iron spikes. So essentially a studded club. Vushundis, a similar weapon with longer iron spikes, and other weapons and missiles. Completely screened all round with volleys of arrows, each of which got stuck into the shaft of another, meaning there's just so many arrows striking everyone. The celestial generals could not be seen, like luminaries hidden by clouds in the sky. Torn in thousands of pieces in the air by the devas, who were skilled archers, those volleys of missiles and weapons surely did not reach the celestial troops at all. Their stock of missiles and weapons being depleted, they, the demons, now showered mountain peaks, trees, and stones on the celestial host, and the devas split them as before. Finding the aforesaid warriors of Indra secure and unhurt by their volleys of weapons and missiles, and unscathed even by the trees, stones, and peaks of mountains of every description, the demons led by Vritra were filled with dismay. All the efforts repeatedly made by the Daityas against the Devas, to whom the all-blissful Lord was favorably disposed, proved entirely infructuous, even as the maledictory and harsh words employed by the vile against exalted souls failed to provoke them. Finding their efforts fruitless, the aforesaid demons, who cherished no devotion to Srihari and had their pride crushed in battle, who had been robbed of their energy, resorted to fleeing away, deserting their leader in the very initial stages of the conflict. Seeing those asuras who had followed his lead until then, fleeing away, and observing his ranks broken and run away through intense fear, the valiant and self-possessed Vritra heartily laughed and spoke as follows. That heroic personage, heroic in the sense of valorous and mighty, obviously not virtuous, made the following speech, which was not only appropriate to the occasion, but thrilling to the brave. Hello, Vriprachiti, Namochi, Puloma, Maya, Anarva, and Shambhara, listen to me, he's saying to his own fleeing asuras. This death is sure to befall everyone that is born, wherever one may be, and no means of avoiding it in this world have been devised. If therefore heaven and fame could be had from it, who as a matter of fact would not actually court such a desirable death? The following two modes of death are approved of in the Shastras and do not easily fall to one's lot. That he who is devoted to the practice of yoga should, after controlling his vital airs and senses, cast off his body through deep concentration of mind on the absolute Brahman, and two, that placed in the forefront of a battle, a man should give up the ghost on the battlefield, taking care not to turn his back on the enemy. Thus ends the 10th discourse, entitled An Account of the Conflict between the Chief of the Devas and the demon Vritra, in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 11, Vritra's teaching to Indra. Sri Sukha went on. Frantic with fear and robbed of good sense and intent on flight, the demons paid no heed at all to the advice of their chief, who was thus preaching virtue to them. O king, roused to indignation and enraged to see the demon host being shattered and put to flight as if it were masterless by the devas. Sometimes the devas are referred to here in the text by a term meaning those who pass through only 3 stages of life. That devas have childhood, they have adolescence, and then they have full adulthood. But unlike beings in this world, they never grow old. They never age past their physical prime. Although they do have a life, their lifespan does end at about approximately 36,000 years, but they're still in their physical prime right up until they die. So roused to indignation and enraged, and to whom time appeared propitious, Vritra, the enemy of Indra, the foremost of the demons, felt agonized. Warding the devas off by his own might, O Parikshit, and scolding them, he addressed the following words to them. What will be gained by you through these fugitives, who are no better than the excreta of their mother, being struck from behind? In other words, he's convincing them not to pursue the routed demons. Indeed, the slaughter of the terror-stricken is neither praiseworthy nor conducive to heavenly enjoyment for those who account themselves as brave. If you are keen about fighting, or if there is courage in your heart, O vile creatures, and if there is no craving for sensuous enjoyments, stand for but a moment before me. Thus threatening the host of Devas, his enemies, by words as well as by his gigantic figure, and full of rage, Vritra, who was possessed of vast strength, roared in such a way that people fainted. Rendered unconscious by that yell of Vritra, all the Devas actually dropped on the ground, just as they would when struck with lightning. Taking up his spear and shaking the earth by his strength, Vritra trod down under his feet the troops of the Devas lying unconscious with their eyes closed, even as a lordly elephant would trample down in its mad fury a bed of lotuses. Vajradhari, which is the name of Indra, the wielder of the thunderbolt, was seized with great indignation to see him and hurled a huge mace at his enemy who was rushing towards him. The demon sportfully caught that most formidable weapon with his left hand, even as it approached him. Roaring in fury, the enemy of Indra, who was possessed of terrible prowess, struck on the head with that mace the elephant Airavata that bore the mighty Indra on its back. All those present on the battlefield admired this feat of his, O Parikshit. Admired as in were impressed by it. Obviously, they're not happy about it. Smitten with the mace hurled by Vritra even as a mountain struck with lightning and much afflicted, Airavata, along with Indra mounted on his back, retreated to a distance of 28 cubits, reeling and vomiting blood. The elephant's mouth broken, the elephant's jaw was broken. That noble soul Vritra did not aim the mace for a second time at Indra, who felt dejected in mind and whose elephant was stunned. O King of Kings, Indra, whose wounded elephant was rid of its pain by the touch of his hand that shed drops of nectar. So Indra possesses some Amrita nectar, so he throws some drops of Amritam on the elephant and heals the broken jaw. Indra stood once more before Vritra. Seeing the aforesaid Indra, the slayer of his brother, standing armed with the thunderbolt and seeking a single combat with him, O King of Kings, Vritra was filled with grief and infatuation as he recollected that cruel and sinful deed of his adversary and spoke laughing. Vritra said, "Luckily enough, you who slew a Brahmana, your own guru and my brother, have firmly stood before me as my adversary. How glad am I that through you, O most wicked one, when your stone-like heart has been pierced through before long by my trident, I shall have discharged my debt today. You ruthlessly lopped off with a sword the heads of my innocent brother, who besides being a Brahmana and your guru, had realized the self and reposing confidence in you was engaged in a yajna on your behalf, as one aspiring to heaven would sever the head of an animal to be sacrificed. When your body has been torn asunder by my trident, vultures will feast on you, forsaken as you are by shame, grace, compassion, and glory, and fit to be censured even by Rakshasas because of your sinful deeds, since you will get no fire to burn you. Nay, I shall indeed propitiate the god Bhairava and others with their retinue, through the blood of those other foolish devas, who following your cruel self have raised their missiles to strike me on this field of battle, and whose necks will be pierced through with my sharpened trident. If, on the other hand, O valiant Indra, you actually succeed in crushing my army and severing my head with your thunderbolt in this encounter, I shall in that case offer my body as an oblation to birds and beasts such as vultures and jackals, and thus freed from all debts, I shall attain to the dust of the feet of enlightened souls. O ruler of devas, wherefore do you not hurl your unfailing thunderbolt at me, your enemy stationed before you? Do not entertain any misgiving. The thunderbolt will not prove ineffectual as your mace or as an entreaty seeking its fulfillment from a miser. Surely this thunderbolt of yours, O Indra, has been whetted by the energy of Sri Hari, as well as by the asceticism of the sage Dadhichi. Prompted by Lord Vishnu, get rid of your enemy with the self-same weapon. Victory, fortune, and virtues, lean to that side alone on which stands Sri Hari. Concentrating my mind on the lotus feet of Lord Sankarsana as he has instructed me, and with the cords of attachment to the pleasures of sense cut asunder by the force of your thunderbolt, and having cast off the body, I shall attain to the destiny of a sage given to contemplation. The Lord does not, of course, bestow on his own people, exclusively devoted to him, the riches that are available in heaven, on earth, or in the subterranean regions, in the patalas, and from which follow hatred, fear, mental anguish, arrogance, discord, suffering, and toil. Our master, O Indra, frustrates the efforts of his servant for the attainment of the three objects of human pursuit. From such frustration is to be inferred the grace of the Lord, which is the lot of those who have nothing and is difficult to attain for others. May I, O Hari, be born again as a servant of those devotees who have solely taken refuge in your feet. Let my mind ponder and tongue celebrate the excellences of the Lord of my life, and let my body do your service. O storehouse of all blessedness and grace, without you I crave neither the realm of Dhruva, nor even the realm of Brahma, nor the sovereignty of the entire globe, nor the lordship of the subterranean regions, nor the siddhis attained through yoga, nor liberation. Even as unfledged birds are eager to see the mother bird, young calves tormented with hunger seek the milk, and a beloved wife, depressed in spirits, longs to see her beloved husband, absent from home. My mind, O lotus-eyed one, is keen to behold you. Let there be my friendship with the devotees of the Lord of excellent renown, revolving as I do into whirligig of transmigration due to my own deeds. And let him whose mind is attached through your Maya to his body, offspring, wife, and home, O Lord, have no friendship with me. Thus ends the 11th discourse entitled Vritra's Teaching to Indra in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 12, the demon Vritra slain. The sage resumed, thus desiring, O king, to drop his body on the field of battle and accounting death preferable to victory, Vritra seized his trident and rushed at Indra, the ruler of the Devas, even as the demon Kaitabha attacked Lord Vishnu's supreme person on the waters. Then whirling his trident, whose prongs were formidable like the flames of the fire that breaks out at the time of universal destruction, and hurling it with great force at the mighty Lord of Paradise, the valiant chief of demons roared and angrily exclaimed, "You are killed, O wicked one." Not perturbed to see the trident, dazzling as a planet or a meteor, darting through the air with a whirling motion, the wielder of the thunderbolt cut it down, as well as his arm, round and thick as the body of Vasuki, with his thunderbolt, which had 100 joints. With one of his arms lopped off and full of rage, Vritra approached Indra, who still held his thunderbolt, and smote him as well as Airavata, the celestial elephant, in the jaws with his iron club, using his remaining left arm. And the thunderbolt dropped down from Indra's hand. The gods and the demons, as well as the hosts of Charanas and Siddhas, admired that most marvelous feat of Vritra, and cried again and again, "Alack, alack," to see the critical plight of Indra, who was invoked by many. Much ashamed, Indra did not pick up again in the presence of his foe the thunderbolt slipped from his hand. To him Vritra said, "Take up your thunderbolt, O Indra. Kill your enemy. This is not the time for despondency. Nowhere does victory invariably woo the bellicose armed with weapons, but only on particular occasions, since they are all subject to their destiny, except the Lord, the eternal person, the all-knowing cause, the one controller of creation, preservation, and dissolution. That Lord alone is responsible for victory and defeat, for it is subject to his control that these worlds, along with their guardian deities, Brahma and others, helplessly carry on their activity like birds caught in a net. Not recognizing the Lord as the cause and the shape of the potency of the Indriyas, the power of the mind and bodily strength, life, immortality, and death as well, man looks upon the gross body as the cause. Just as a wooden puppet or even as a mechanical toy deer is subject to the control of the showman or the individual winding up the toy, likewise no living beings, O Indra, is subject to the control of God. Without his help, the jiva, prakriti, mahattattva, the ego, the 5 elements, the indriyas, and the mind fail to create, maintain, and dissolve the universe. He who is ignorant of this regards his own incapable self as capable. It is he who evolves beings through other beings and devours them himself through beings. Whatever blessings in the form of life, affluence, fame, and power are coveted by a man are obtained by him at the time appointed for the same, as surely as their contraries, even though he may be unwilling to have them. Therefore, one should remain balanced in joy and sorrow proceeding from fame and disrepute, victory and defeat, and even so from life and death. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are the modes of Prakriti, but not the attributes of the self. He who recognizes the self to be a witness of these is not bound by them. Look at me, O Indra, exerting to the best of my power with intent to take your life, though vanquished in battle and having my weapon and arm cut down. This warfare is a game of chance in which life is staked. Arrows are thrown as dice, and the animals, etc., carrying the warriors are the gaming boards. It is never known here whose lot is victory and whose defeat. Sri Shuka continued. On hearing the guileless speech of Vritra, Indra welcomed it. Picking up his thunderbolt and feeling no wonder, he laughed heartily and replied to him. Indra said, "Oh, you have achieved your object, O demon chief, blessed as you are with such a mind, and devoted with all your being to the ruler of the universe, yourself and friend. You have actually reached the end of the Maya of Lord Vishnu, which deludes people, in that, having shed the demoniac disposition, you have attained to the level of an exalted soul. It is really a great wonder that, though Rajasika by temperament, you have conceived such an unflinching devotion to Lord Vasudeva, who is Sattva personified. What use can he have for the shallow ditch water who sports in an ocean of nectar, blessed as he is with devotion to the almighty Sri Hari, the bestower of final moksha?" Sri Shuka went on. Thus talking to each other with a view to ascertaining dharma, the chief of the Devas and the demon Vritra, who were both endowed with extraordinary prowess and who were leaders of warriors, fought on. Whirling his terrible bludgeon made of black iron with his left hand, Vritra, the chastiser of his foes, hurled it at Indra, O noble Parikshit. That Deva, however, synchronously cut down with his thunderbolt, which had 100 joints, the bludgeon as well as the hand of Vritra that resembled the trunk of an elephant. With both arms cut asunder at the very root and streaming blood, the demon shone like a mountain struck by Indra and dropped from the air with both its wings chopped off. The demon, who is possessed of inordinate strength and extraordinary prowess, and whose gigantic form was exceedingly tall, stretched his lower jaw to the ground and extended the upper jaw to heaven, as though devouring the three worlds, with his mouth deep as the sky, tongue fearful as the serpent's, and teeth fierce as death, shaking mountains with violence and pounding the earth under his feet like a huge mountain walking about. He went up to Indra and swallowed him together with Airavata, even as a python would swallow an elephant. Seeing him devoured by Vritra, the gods, along with the lords of creation, the Prajapatis, and eminent sages, were seized with despair and exclaimed, "Ah, what a pity!" Though swallowed by the chief of the demons and reaching his stomach, Indra did not die, protected as he was by the Supreme Person in the form of the Narayana Kavacha, as well as by mystical powers and the powers of conjuration. Ripping up his belly with his thunderbolt, and coming out, so tearing out through Vritra's belly from within, the powerful slayer of the demon Bala, that's Indra, Bala is another demon who he slew on a previous occasion, with vigor lopped off the enemy's head like the top of a mountain. Though revolving with a quick speed and cutting on all sides, the thunderbolt felled the neck of Vritra in as many days as are taken by the northward and southward marches of heavenly bodies at the time appointed for the death of the demon. So to explain that, it's explained in the Vedas that Vritra swallowed Indra on the winter solstice, and that Indra broke free on the summer solstice. So it was a full 6 months that Indra was within the belly of Vritra. And the swallowing of the light by the darkness is equated to the darkest part of the year, and the victory of the light of the brightest part of the year. So that's what that was a reference to there. This whole battle is described in detail in the Rig Veda that the Bhagavatam is summarizing here. At that time, drums sounded with a loud noise, and the Gandharvas and Siddhas, along with hosts of eminent sages, joyously showered flowers on him, glorifying him with sacred hymns celebrating the prowess of the slayer of Vritra. Issuing forth from the body of Vritra in the form of an effulgence, of an inner light, O chastiser of foes, Parikshit. The soul of Vritra entered and merged into the Lord, who is beyond all the material worlds, while all the people looked on with wonder. Thus ends the 12th discourse, entitled Vritra Slain, in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahamsa Samhita. Discourse 13 is going to be the last one for today, ending this story. Indra's victory. Sri Shuka began again. Vritra having been slain, the three worlds with their guardian deities, excepting, of course, Indra, O munificent Parikshit, were immediately rid of anxiety and felt gratified at heart. We'll get to why Indra did not feel this way in a moment. The gods and sages, Pitris and spirits, the demons and the attendants of the Devas, the Gandharvas and others, returned to their realms of their own accord without taking leave of Indra, and then Brahma, the creator, Shiva, Indra, and the other gods dispersed. The king said, I long to hear, O sage, the cause of Indra's unhappiness. Why should there be agony to the chief of the Devas from something as a result of which the Devas felt gratified? Sri Shuka replied, frightened with the prowess of the demon Vritra, all the gods along with the sages implored Indra to slay him. He, however, did not feel inclined to do so, afraid as he was of killing a Brahmana, which was the very sin that gave rise to Vritra in the first place, since Vritra was actually a Brahman. Indra said, the sin caused by the slaughter of Vishvarupa has been graciously shared by women, the earth, water, and the trees. But how shall I be able to atone for the slaughter of Vritra? Sri Shuka continued, this is also why all the other beings who were there did not take Indra's leave before departing, since he had just killed a Brahman, and they were worried about, they didn't want to come anywhere near him and possibly share the pollution. Sri Shuka continued, on hearing this, the sages replied to the mighty Indra as follows. We shall get you to propitiate the Lord by means of an Ashvamedha Yajna, and all will be well with you. Do not be afraid. Having worshipped Lord Narayana, the Supreme Spirit, the inner controller and ruler of the universe, through an Ashvamedha Yajna, you will be absolved even of the sin proceeding from the extermination of the world. Through the utterance of his name, the murderer of a Brahmana, the slaughterer of a cow, the slayer of one's father, mother, or guru, or any other sinner, one who eats the flesh of a dog, and even a man of sinful birth are purified. Propitiating him with reverence through the Mahayagya Ashvamedha, which will be performed by us, you will not be touched by sin, even after killing the mobile and immobile creation, including the entire Brahmana race, much less by the sin that may follow from the subjugation of an evildoer like Vritra. Sri Shuka went on. Thus urged by the Brahmanas, Indra had already killed Vritra. On his being slain, the sin of having killed a Brahmana came upon Indra. Due to that sin, Indra suffered agony, and no peace of mind returned to him. Even virtues failed to bring relief to him who, while endowed with a sense of shame, has incurred obloquy. He saw the aforesaid sin running after him in humanoid form, resembling that of a pariah woman suffering from consumption, clad in blood-stained clothes, her limbs trembling due to old age, and throwing about her gray hair, crying, stop, stop, and befouling the road with her breath, stinking like fish. Indra, the thousand-eyed, O ruler of the people, ranged through the sky and in all directions, betaking himself to the northeast, O king, in other words, fleeing from this pursuing Brahma Hatya Shakti, and quickly entered the Manasa lake, the lake Manasarovar, near Mount Kailash. Pondering within the means of absolution from the sin of having slain a Brahmana and getting no subsistence, because he remained underwater within the Manasa lake, and had the god of fire for his purveyor. In other words, the person who feeds Indra is Agni, but if he's underwater, then fire can't reach him. Indra lived unperceived in the fibers of a lotus stalk growing in that lake, for 1,000 years, hiding from Brahmahatya. Till then, the famous king Nahusha, who had acquired the capacity to rule over Svarga by virtue of his worship, asceticism and mystical powers, ruled over the third heaven, the Trayastrinsha Svarga of Indra, as Indra in his place. His intellect having been blinded through arrogance caused by opulence and power, he was cast into from that role into a subhuman species by Shachi Devi, the wife of Indra. This is a whole other elaborate story that will be told another time. Called by the invocation of the Brahmanas, the real Indra, whose sin had been neutralized through meditation on the upholder of truth, returned after that to Svarga, and the sin that had been deprived of its force by Sri Rudra could not assail him, protected as he was by the goddess Lakshmi. Brahmana sages approached him, O scion of Bharata, and duly consecrated him, they say, for an Ashvamedha Yajna, intended to propitiate the Supreme Person. Now, while the Supreme Person, who embodies in himself all the divinities, was being worshipped by the mighty Indra in the course of the Ashvamedha Yajna, elaborately performed through the instrumentality of sages who were expositors of the Vedas, even that huge mass of sin in the shape of the slaughter of the demon son of the god Tvashta, O king, was actually reduced to nothingness by that very yajna, just as the hoarfrost is melted by the sun. By propitiating the most ancient person, the deity presiding over sacrifices, through the Ashvamedha, which was being elaborately performed according to the scriptural ordinance through the instrumentality of Marichi and other sages, the aforesaid Indra was completely rid of his sins and became great once more. This great narrative is instrumental in washing off all one's sins and conducive to the growth of devotion, replete as it is. Replete as it is with the praises of the Lord, whose holy feet enable one to ford the vast ocean of metempsychosis, containing an account of his devotee Vritra, as well as of the absolution and decisive victory of the mighty Indra, nicknamed as Marutvan, the leader of the Maruts. Therefore, the wise should always recite or hear on every festival this story relating to Indra, which brings wealth, fame, and longevity, is a means of ridding one of all sinful propensities, and a source of blessings, and helps one to conquer one's enemies. Thus ends the 13th discourse entitled The Victory of Indra in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that's a good place to stop for today. The story might make you wonder how Vritra became such a devotee and had such spiritual insight as he showed. That's the very next thing Parikshit asks about, and the whole next story is an answer to that question. But I think that'll be good to do next week. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Devala.
All right.
Thank you, Devala. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
And my apologies to everyone. I forgot that I didn't mute. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. I muted it for you.
Thank you so much. So have a wonderful day, everybody.
Yeah, you too. Jai Shri Krishna.
God bless. Jai Shri Krishna.